All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Benjamin, and today, since I've gotten a little comments on, I can't remember if it's my most recent, actually, I'm positive it's my most recent uh, video about my methodology and my model specifically. So I felt it was a good idea and a good time to actually go over the model, explain kind of how it works, why I made the decisions I did. For newer viewers who maybe don't want to search my channel for when I first introduced it, and kind of explain how I'm going to be using it from now on and why I do the things I do with it. Specifically, why I choose the gradient I do when I'm choosing the state rating according to the model, and why at the beginning of each month and why on the day before election day I'm going to release both the model as well as my own personal prediction on the election as to where I disagree with my model or whether or not I'm going to be doing something different with my own forecast and what the model says. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with what this entire thing means, right? Okay, so I take 50% and then plus half of E2, right? So, so half of E2. And the reason why I do that is here we have the partisan lean of each state. So the partisanship. Now, at the bottom, I could do it for each state, but I use those in the state forecasting. By the way, Trump's approval rating has gone a little bit up, and I'll show you, and if you've seen 538, you may actually know why, the latest poll page, right? So this partisanship is actually based off of a spreadsheet that I created, and I can't find it now. I think it actually may be on a flash drive that I have. So I'll see if I can find it again, and I'll put a link to it. And that's from Future Margins spreadsheet. And really what it does is try to establish a partisanship going forward based off of the average partisan shift of each state. And I'm using the numbers that I've managed for 2020. And I may explain that a little bit better at a different time, but basically what I wanted to do with that is choose an election a few cycles back that was analogous to the 2016 election. And I chose 2000 because it was the furthest back I could go while still being in the current political system that had an open presidency after a two-term Democrat. So that's why I kind of chose 2000 as my starting point, and then I found the partisan shift to 2016. I took the average party swing, and I did that by using the two-party vote share rather than the actual share, rather than the raw vote totals. The only state I think that mathematical exercise is inaccurate on is Utah, but Utah had some very unique factors in 2016 that affected its partisanship. So anyway, as you can see here, positive equals a Republican, partisan lean, negative equals a Democrat. And this is actually compared to the nation. So that's why you'll see some states that even went Democratic, say, let's look at Minnesota, that has a Republican lean, or that were extremely narrow, such as Michigan, that had a Republican lean to it. And this is because they were that much more Republican than the nation as a whole. Let's look at Florida, which is a touch over 4 points more Republican than the nation as a whole, yet Donald Trump only won it by 1.5 points or something like that. So why does that happen? Well, the truth is that's because Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by about 2.6-ish%, 2.6, 2.8, somewhere in that range. And when you add that together with the fact that Donald Trump won the state by about a point and a half, maybe 2 points, you get a partisan lean like this. And then you look at a territory. It's not a state, but we have to treat it as a state for presidential elections. The District of Columbia, that is 90 points more Democratic than the nation as a whole. But you can go down and you can see, some states are fairly close. Look at Maine, for example. It's almost dead even, which I think is reasonable. Minnesota, yeah. Nevada is more Democratic. New Hampshire more Republican. Again, this is based off of how close they align to anything. And I've actually shifted that over to go towards what 2020 will be. For example, Florida, if we go back to Florida, it was actually a little bit closer to that in 2016, but since 2000, it's become slightly more Republican. If we remember, in 2000, the popular vote was extremely close, and Gore won a plurality by actually he may have crossed 50, but he won it very narrowly. He had more popular votes, but it was still extremely narrow. And Bush won Florida by a couple hundred votes. I think it was like 537 or something like that. And then all of a sudden, Donald Trump wins it by, a couple percent. And Clinton wins the election. So it's shifted more Republican. Sort of. Because it's a swing state. But based off of the numbers, it should be a Republican-leaning state in 2020 for a lot of reasons. Again, Florida really likes incumbents, stuff like that. Right? So we do that, and of course, on the Democratic side, we flip it. Now, if we go to a state with a Democratic Party lean, we're still subtracting because I've used a negative value for the Democratic one just to make the math work, so I could just, click this, get the crosshairs on it, and drag it all the way down. And positive and negative, it doesn't matter. I just use positive for Republicans and negative for Democrats just because that's the way I did it. It didn't have a bias in selecting it, and mathematically it works out to be the exact same. Because with a negative value and subtracting it, we get a positive value for, obvious reasons, right? So after that, we go to the 2016 results, and we actually go to this page. And I use this as both a control and a dummy. And the reason why I say a dummy is it's kind of just there to keep my model from fluctuating too wildly. Because I want my model to have a certain level of lag. That way, if there's a convention bump, it doesn't take it too seriously on account of the convention bump, all of a sudden saying, oh my God, the Democrats are winning because they've got great convention bump numbers, and then all of a sudden you have the Republican convention that flips it the other direction. I want it to stay somewhere in between, because when both convention bumps wear off, it's going to go back to it, and I don't like my models being extremely volatile. Therefore, sometimes it will take a week, maybe 2 weeks, to actually show a major shift in the race, but it's going to pick it up if it's actually a sustained shift in the race, because I'd rather not have my model treating everything as a horse race. I want my model to be more of a constant rather than back and forth, because I don't think the horse race is an accurate way to analyze an election. Because the truth is, people gush and ooh and awe over, half-point swings. Like, oh my God, this is in the bag now. And then all of a sudden it changes and they're all doom and gloom. Well, I don't like that. It leads to too much emotion being put into things. And I'm trying to, with this model, eliminate any human error, aka any personal biases I have against the Democrats. I don't really have a personal bias against the Republicans, though to a degree I do. And I really don't like Donald Trump. But anyway, the next one is use the state and national mean, and that's actually just the polls only. And I could select it as that, I could call it that. And this is the polling average for every state. So let's choose a state at random. I pick Kansas. Okay, so let's find Kansas, right? So you go to Kansas page A2, and you'll also, and I'm using approval ratings to determine this average, right? And the reason why I'm using the approval ratings for each state is because right now there's not a lot of high quality polling coming out of a lot of states, especially the ones that are considered safe or traditionally have a significant party lean one way or another, such as a Kansas or a Louisiana or a Missouri. So then we go back here, and as you can see, it's just the same number, just collapsed into a very easy to read format. And this is the national one based off of here, which, as you can see, here we go. This is the Emerson poll that was released not too long ago. And of course, this is another page of the 2016 results, just so they're easily accessible and you can focus on them a little bit more specifically. All right, let's scroll back up and put it there. I'm not OCD, I swear. All right, now we average all of that out. Notice how it is divided by 3, correct? So that will give us a baseline. And I could show you what that baseline is, but it kind of treats them all the same. And this is, again, to divide. It weighs all 3 of those equally: partisanship, 2016, and the current polling environment. And, again, this is to prevent volatility. It will move, especially if there are large swings. However, the reason I've done it like this is because I want my model to be less volatile. And I've actually attempted including this twice and making it divided by 4. That way the polling environment is, it has a little bit more weight. And I'm probably going to do that. I'm probably going to do that as soon as we start getting more high quality polls. As in, we typically get 2 or 3 polls from each swing state a week. But until then, which is probably going to happen around the convention, until then, we just don't have a good picture. We don't know who's going to win the primary. It could be Biden, it could be Sanders, it could be Buttigieg, it could be Warren. So I'm not going to include increase the weight of the polling environment just yet, because we don't know who the nominee is going to be. And that's also the reason why I'm not picking a specific candidate for this model just yet. And why I average all polls. Let's choose a swing state that has a decent amount of polling. I think Michigan actually has a decent amount. Yeah, we'll use Michigan as an example, right? So here's an approval rating from Morning Consult. I use them because it's decent. And then here are 2 polls. I forget which ones those are, but they show a certain picture, right? And you're going to say, okay, well, that seems like a reasonable figure. That's an 8-point Dem victory, thereabouts. And what I do is I average Donald Trump's percentage, and I average all the Dems' percentages. because that's going to show, I think, a more accurate picture of what Democratic support is. And when we get a candidate or a defined front runner who is going to be at some point the presumptive nominee, that at that point I'll switch to that candidate specifically and just focus on their numbers. And that will, and again, I'm doing this because I want to avoid picking and choosing a candidate. For example, I could choose Buttigieg, and all of a sudden Donald Trump is going to be crushing him. Or I could choose Bloomberg, and actually the same thing would be happening because people don't actually like Bloomberg. But then I could choose Biden, and Donald Trump is losing Georgia because Biden is a fairly strong candidate. So I average all of them together, and that's going to lead to a more accurate gauge of Democratic support, which is somewhere in between. And also it will kind of even out Donald Trump's support in such a way that it will show what his actual support is. Now, a lot of polls will have a decent number of undecided voters, and I don't split them up because there's no accurate way to tell which way undecided voters are going to go. So I just leave them out of things, and sure, it may in effect create it so it's a 50-50 split, but at the end of the day, that allows me to have a little bit of free range and say, okay, well, these states are in play. We don't know how the independents are going to break, or the undecideds are going to break. So what we're going to do is we're just going to say, let's ignore them and just focus on what numbers we do have. So now, once we get past that, that establishes where the fundamentals go. So let's go down to I-53, right? And I have that. So, I-53. We have to scroll a little bit here. We have this. This is the net difference in support. And again, undecideds are effectively split evenly. So Trump is underwater by 7.25% or thereabouts, right? So that means 3.5, about 3.6% swing against Donald Trump. And we're actually adding that on both sides. Actually, we're subtracting it in the Democrats because, again, it's a negative value, so it aids the Democrats. And if, at the end of the day, we have a situation where it becomes positive, well, the good thing is we don't have to worry about it because, again, positive plus positive is going to equal positive jump. So this is actually taking off about 3% of about 3.6% from Donald Trump, from the baseline, right, for approval rating. And that's just a straight percent. And that's because I don't really feel like judging based off of national approval rating whether or not Donald Trump is going to beat it or whether he's going to fall under it. Historically speaking, presidents have always done better than their approval rating when it comes to vote getting. But that's more applicable on the state level. So I just, treat it as a fundamental and say, well, people don't like to vote for someone they don't like. So we're just going to do that as a blanket. And it just makes it a little bit easier. And because I'm not a professional statistician, I don't feel like making judgment calls like that, right? And I'm having it because that will create the necessary swing, okay? Because Democrats are getting 3.6% added on top of their baseline, right? And in that factor, we're adding in plus in 54 and 55. So we go all the way down to what those are. 54 and 55, and these are the fundamentals, the true fundamentals. Incumbency, which I include an incumbency advantage. And the way I figured that out is I looked at every presidential election with an incumbent since 1928. I threw out the biggest outliers in terms of improvement and failure, with the biggest failure on account of a candidate getting less than they got in their second go-around, aka their second presidential election when they were the incumbent. Okay, so their second presidential election rather than their first. So 28, Herbert Hoover ran for the first time, correct? And then in 32, he ran as an incumbent. So I took the incumbent, I took the swing in vote that they got from their first run to when they ran as an incumbent. I took out the two biggest outliers, meaning the greatest gain in vote share and the greatest loss in vote share, because the outliers are going to skew things a little bit too much. This is a standard statistical practice, by the way. And then I averaged it all together and found that on average a candidate will get about, at least as a presidential candidate, they'll get about 3.5%. It was a little bit over that, actually. It was like 3.58 or 3.59 or something in that range. So I rounded down to 3.5 just to make it easy. But that was the 3.5% was an increase in their vote share. Whereas their opponent wound up doing about 3.5% worse than their challenger the previous time. So that winds up to about, it was close to like a 7.5. It was a little bit over 7% swing in the vote, in the actual vote share. So I've created a 7-point swing. So this pretty much negates the approval rating at the moment. And I use economics on a sliding scale, and I kind of reserve the right to play around with this because I'm not exactly sure how much it'll help or hurt. For example, if we went into something similar to the Great Depression where the market lost half its value or 60% of its value in a single day, at that point, I'd probably swing it very much against Trump, like -5 and +5, or maybe even more. And right now, unless things dramatically improve, again, like gaining 60% value in a single day, I do the exact opposite. But that's not the only thing that goes into the economic fundamental. It's not just the market, because I don't think the market is a valuable gauge of the economy. I think it shows you how well investment is going, and that is certainly a factor in how well the economy is. But I look at GDP growth, I look at wage increases, and I look at inflation, and those are what mainly go into it. And when inflation is low, wages are growing, and GDP is growing, generally that's a sign that the economy is good. I also look at consumer confidence, and consumer confidence is pretty good right now. So with all those factors in Trump's favor, I'm only giving him an extra point. Of course, it is a 2-point swing, but I don't think that's unfair. Because what did Bill Clinton say? It's the economy, stupid. And I firmly believe that. And that's kind of why I've designed my model to have an economic factor. So those in total create about a 9-point swing. That's actually significant. But as you can see, that about makes up for it. But here's the thing. You go here. Actually is a 9-point swing. But I also do this. About a fifth of so looking at this, right? Yeah, so about a fifth of the popular vote difference, right? And of course we can enter. Cool. Because I didn't change anything, right? So about a fifth of the difference we subtracted from the Democrats, and because it's a negative value, it actually boosts their share a tiny bit, and it actually decreases the president's share, right? And I only do a blanket fifth. I was tempted to work it out and try and figure out how it would work for elasticity, but with partisanship included as a factor, I think we're good enough on elasticity, which is basically just a measure of how swingy are the state's voters. With a state like Rhode Island being extremely swingy, if I remember correctly, 548 found that for every point shift in the national electorate, Rhode Island shifts 1.4 points. And then you go to a state that is not swingy at all, such as Mississippi, which maybe for every point that the national electorate shifts, Mississippi shifts about like 0.3 points, which is not all that much. But I feel with partisanship included, that's pretty good. And like I said, as soon as we get a little bit more high quality polling, I am almost certainly going to increase the weight of the polling environment as a factor. So that's the basics of how my model works and why I made the decisions I have. And I constantly am reviewing the methodology and my decision making to try and make this as unbiased a model as I can possibly get. So overall, there's maybe, because of I'm weighing fundamentals pretty heavily, this may overstate Trump's strength by maybe a few percentage points, but I really don't think it's all that much. We'll see. But I believe it's going to, at the end of the day, be within about a standard deviation, which for the amount of information I'm putting into this, I am going to say standard deviation should be about the equivalent of a 5% swing. So that's why I chose 5% increments in the whenever I presented all this information as a map, right? So that's why the tilt is to about 5%. That and most places that have a tilt rating in their forecasts wind up being about within 5%, right? So I figured that's a good little breakdown. So 5% then for the tilt, lean is 5 to 10, 10 to 15 is likely, and anything over 15 is safe. Of course, we go the other direction, and for the other party, whichever one you want to have it be. But actually, let's go to Rhode Island and kind of look at it. So right now it's showing just within 15 points. It's actually close to 14 even. So why don't we check out what's going on in the polling environment. So obviously Donald Trump isn't exactly popular. And if you go based off of the polls only, which is an option, I prefer to use my forecast because it's trying to forecast what the election will be rather than just overreacting to polls, especially in an environment where we have a sparse number of polling, especially in safe states. So, you look at this and it's showing that Alaska is within 5, that Arizona is being won by the Democrats by about a point on average, or by about a point. Arkansas is at 11%. Colorado is interestingly only just within 15. Connecticut is at 20. District of Columbia, that is, I think this is slightly erroneous, simply because Morning Consult somehow managed to find 16% of DC willing to vote for willing to who agree with Donald Trump. I don't agree with that. Interestingly enough, Delaware, if I remember, is I think slightly closer than Colorado. Yeah, it's closer than Colorado, and that's based off of mostly approval ratings. I think there may be one non-approval rating poll in there. Trump is winning in Florida though. And this is purely based off of polls and his approval rating in the state. And we've had a decent number of polls. In Georgia, he's winning. Let's go down. Hawaii, Idaho. Idaho's somewhat close. But this also, you can see, has a decent number of undecideds in a lot of places. For example, actually, Texas has more than Utah now because of whatever reason. Let's see. Iowa, he's only narrowly losing. Indiana, he's only winning by 5. Kansas, he's winning by like 6. Let's find another state. Maine is surprisingly close in this, showing that it is probably... the state's partisanship is probably changing in the way that I figured it would. Michigan and Minnesota, Trump has about the same number of support. It's the detractors that differ slightly. Let's find, okay, Missouri, that's about 7%. Montana, that's about 6%. Nebraska, that's, again, about 5%. But see, this is why I include the fundamentals, because I'm still using state-by-state approval ratings, and right now I don't have Gallup's figures, which will show a little bit closer to where I expect the vote totals to be, with a few exceptions. Texas is really close, according to my polls only, and Utah is also extremely close. Virginia, this is the surprising one. So let's actually go to Virginia and talk about this state. So this is an interesting one. If I remember correctly, this was actually a poll of potential matchups, and I averaged everyone out. And Trump was winning, I think, all but one or maybe every single one, with Biden being the one that he didn't or that was the closest. And it was from a legitimate pollster. It wasn't like Rasmussen or anything like that. And by the way, I don't include national polls where it's only of one candidate because I can't average it out, and I can't because it doesn't give me any other variables to look at that I can use as a control. And this is his approval rating in the state, which that is, in my opinion, perfectly fair. I don't think a lot of people actually like Donald Trump, but in this state, unless you're out here in the sticks where I live. But here's the interesting thing: you would think with that and with that voting, with that polls only forecast of Virginia, you would think that my model would all of a sudden boost Donald Trump into a massive victory in Virginia. But you look at Virginia's numbers, and it doesn't. And this is why I think I've actually done my model extremely well. The partisanship of the state actually cancels out any potential swing that maybe this excessively gives him. And these are also numbers that are close to what you would expect a candidate to get in a presidential race. So let's actually go ahead and go to YabMS. Yeah, I know I need to shift Control R. This will upload it. And I'm going to close that. And let's actually fill this map out just to show you where it is today with the approval rating polls that got released. Let's actually go ahead and show you these, because So this is, I believe this one was ABC that released. This one was Rasmussen. No, sorry, this was Emerson, this was ABC, and this was the Rasmussen one. And then I think this was Rasmussen, or this was YouGov yesterday, and this was Rasmussen. Now, if you look at this, this is Gallup and likely registered voter polls only. I don't really use all polls of all adults unless it's Gallup, because they actually wind up, on average, underselling Republicans by a decent amount in general, in terms of what the eventual election results are. And likely registered voter polls actually do an extremely good job of forecasting the results. Occasionally in certain states they will have a little bit more variance, but at the national level they are extremely good. So let's go to Alabama. And that is a safe margin. That's a little bit over 30 points. Alaska, we're in the likely zone. Arizona, that's in the tilt zone, and that is actually somewhere I would say is in play. Arkansas, we're closing in on 30, so obviously safe. Then we go to California, which is quite obviously safe. Colorado, that is greater than 5%, less than 10. So that's in the lean category, and that could be in play if there is an error in Colorado polls. But Democrats should be considered favored there by a decent amount. And anything in the tilt you should consider in play / toss-up. I just don't like using toss-up unless my model shows it's actually dead tie, which has happened before when I've done my updates, right? So Connecticut we go, and that is in the safe category. The District of Columbia, obviously that's going to be a safe state. Delaware, that's closing in on the lean, but it's in the likely. And I think that's actually fair considering he somehow has a decent level of support in the state of Delaware. I'm not sure why that's the case, but it is the case. Florida, that's tilt towards Donald Trump. And my original home state of Georgia. And we're going to tilt that. Well, let's actually make sure I got that. That's actually 6 points, so that's in the lean category. And I actually have Georgia as likely in my own beliefs because it takes a lot in order to actually move Georgia in terms of the actual polling numbers. It takes a lot because there are very few swing voters in Georgia, and that's true of most of the South. There are very few swing voters, and there are a ton of baked-in voters. Let's go to Hawaii, which is safe. I already marked that. Cool. Idaho, another safe state. Illinois, that is a safe state. I really don't expect Donald Trump to make any sort of progress there. Indiana, that is safe, and let's actually talk about this. So, on average, a vice president will give about a 3% swing, so I've done that. Whether or not you believe that is up to you. But my research has shown that a vice presidential candidate does actually give a boost in the state, in their home state. And a president generally gets a 7% swing in their own home state. However, I've also taken that off for Donald Trump because he no longer is a New York resident, even though he's still very clearly a New Yorker. I'm not a fan. I don't think it will actually matter. Plus, since he's no longer a New York resident, New Yorkers won't have the benefit of voting for one of their own. So I'm not going to include Donald Trump in Florida, believe it or not. I haven't given him, because he's an official Florida resident, you would figure he'd get a home state bonus, but I'm not going to give it to him in Florida because he's clearly not a Floridian. though I guess he does count for Florida man memes now, so we'll see. Let's go back. Let's go to Iowa, and that's nearing 10%. Still a lean, though. So in Iowa, I actually consider in play, though a lot of polls show Donald Trump winning that, even over Biden. So again, it may be candidate specific. Kansas, that's a hope and a prayer for Democrats. Kentucky, same thing, and actually same thing in the Senate race. Louisiana, obvious. Maine, this one is extremely close. It is a tilt for the Democrats. I actually believe that puts Maine's 2nd congressional district in the safe category. However, I expect turnout to be better in the Portland, Maine area, aka the 1st congressional district. Maryland and Massachusetts, quite obviously, are safe for the Democrats. I wouldn't expect anything different. Michigan, it's showing Donald Trump winning by it's 4 plus about 0.25%, which is not a lot, and that is 100% in play. Minnesota, that is a tilt towards the Democrats. That's about a little bit under 3%, about 2.5, which is a little bit wider of a margin than Hillary Clinton got, interestingly enough. Mississippi, actually it might be, yeah, because she won by 1.6 in 16, if I remember correctly. Mississippi, obviously safe for the Republicans. However, if you'll notice, about 40% of the state is going to vote for the Democrat. Interestingly enough, 38% of the population is African American in Mississippi. I'm not trying to, use that as discrimination, but it is one of the reasons why Democrats will almost always get about 40% of the vote in Mississippi in statewide elections. Missouri is safe for the Republicans, and that's not too much of a surprise. Montana, safe, though it could be competitive with the right candidate or under the right environment. Nebraska, that is safe statewide, and I am only tilting the 2nd congressional district because it's based off of my research. 58-37 is about when it will be within 5%. Nevada and New Hampshire are both tilting towards the Democrats, meaning they are states that are in play, but that is general knowledge, I would assume. Model as New Jersey is likely. I disagree. I count it as a safe state. It's just the margin there is forecasted to be within 15, which a lot of people think is way too wide of a margin to be considering likely. But again, it's the way I do it because about 5% swing is a standard deviation. So it would take a shift of a little bit over 2 standard deviations in order for Donald Trump to win it, meaning it's not very likely at all. New Mexico, that is in the lean category because it is within 10%, but not within 5. New York, that is safe. North Carolina, that is in the tilt category, and that's fair, but I have it as leans because North Carolina is a turnout swing state, and Republicans have a slight advantage in North Carolina when it comes to turnout, at least at the national level. Local Democrats can do better because local Democrats are slightly less in favor of some of the policies of, say, New York and California and Hawaii and states like that. North Carolina Democrats tend to be a bit more likely to be, say, pro-gun, pro-life, stuff like that. North Dakota, obviously that's safe Republican. Ohio, that is at about an 8%, so in the lean category, meaning it is certainly within play for the right Democrat, but it takes a little bit of effort. Let's look at Oklahoma, which is safe. Oregon, that is in the likely category. I personally count it as safe. Again, it would take over 2 standard deviation shift in order for Donald Trump to win that. Pennsylvania is in the tilt category, and it is certainly within play. Again, part of that is the partisanship of the state should favor the GOP, and based off of the House results, that is probably true. Though the redistricting has made it a lot more competitive. And with everything, again, you would think that with a partisanship that wide, that it shouldn't be this close, that Donald Trump should be at least at 50. But again, that's because of the fundamentals that are working against him, as well as the approval rating polls from Pennsylvania. And I could go and look at Pennsylvania's numbers, but we surprisingly haven't had as much polling data from Pennsylvania. These are, I think we maybe only had 5 or 6 polls, and they're all averaged in from 2019, which includes the monthly approval rating. So, and this is an approval rating poll, which is about where I would expect it to be. And again, presidents tend to outperform their approval rating polls at the state level. At least if we go based off of Gallup's 2012 approval rating polls, Barack Obama tended to outperform his approval rating in swing states by about a 10-point swing at most, which is important to note. So about 5%. 5% each direction. This winds up being less than a 10-point swing, which I think is reasonable. Anyway, go to Rhode Island, and that is in the likely category. That's about 14%. And I'm just doing that because I'm OCD. There we go. 14 point. That's likely. Again, it takes almost a 3 standard deviation shift in order for Donald Trump to carry that. So again, I consider Rhode Island a safe state. And South Carolina, we've got, actually, it's safe for once in my model. My model likes to put it as likely. I, again, consider this a safe state because it's not going to go towards the Democrats in 2020. South Carolina, South Dakota, we're looking at a safe state, obviously. Tennessee, safe. Don't think anybody expects a volunteer state to go to the Democrats this cycle. Texas, we're almost at 10%. Again, it's in that lean category, so it could be in play under the right circumstances for Democrats, but it's still a bit too early for the state to go to the Democrats. And interestingly enough, we're about the state's partisanship. So that indicates it is shifting. Its votes can be up for grabs in, say, 2024 or 2028. Again, I think it depends on the Democratic candidate as well as the national economic environment and maybe the diplomatic environment as well. Utah, that is safe, but I think we're slightly underselling Donald Trump's vote share here. Though I think the Democratic share is probably correct. Again, look at the partisanship, but also look at the amount of undecideds that my model is saying will exist. And again, I'm not splitting those up. We'll just wait and see, right? Vermont, that's obviously a safe Democratic state. And Virginia, that is in the tilt Democratic category. And if you'll notice, and that's another one of those states that I'm actually shocked at how close my model thinks Virginia will be. So that's one that I'm going to keep my eyes out on. And I'm going to be traveling around the state throughout the year in order to figure out what the election result will be. And don't worry, I'm going to definitely visit Nova. I'm going to visit Tidewater, Virginia, and I'm going to try and go to a few places in between. I may go out to Bristol. We'll just have to see where I have the ability to do that. Washington, safe Democratic, obviously, though it is getting somehow a little bit closer. West Virginia, country roads, the mountain state, or the mountaineer state, we're 69% nice. Um, Obviously, that is safe Republican. Wisconsin, that is actually tilted towards Donald Trump. Again, that is a state that is in play for sure. And let's actually go to Wisconsin here and look at this. Again, we've had some polling information from the state. This is an approval rating poll. This is a actual poll of voter intention. Same with this one. And that shows that. And the partisanship is actually making a slight difference of both the partisanship of the state as well as the incumbency and economics are probably affecting it, but it's not affecting it as much as I think some people, as much as the supposed 9-point shift that this produces, thanks to the fact that I am including basically just the national net difference. So that winds up being maybe a 2-point advantage towards Trump. So we're not talking about a significant one. So a total of maybe a 4-point swing. Which with this is creating only that much of a swing. Remember, we're only creating that much of a swing. So we're talking about maybe a 5-point swing because of partisanship. And most of the time, my model doesn't show Wisconsin in Donald Trump's favor. And of course, Wyoming is going to obviously be heavily in Donald Trump's favor. And of course, we're seeing that the national polling picture shows that Donald Trump is narrowly losing the popular vote, or losing a plurality of it, which we would expect with as narrowly as it is, maybe Minnesota and New Hampshire, Virginia, and Nevada to flip because their partisanship is not as much as you would think. And this is actually consistent with my research based off of a popular vote difference of about 0.5%. And again, you can say what you want about what maybe I'm giving Trump too much of a bump, and I should start weighing the national polling environment a little bit more. And again, I will, but I want to make sure that I have a lot more polls coming in each week before I do that. Otherwise, we're going to have a picture where Donald Trump is in danger of losing Kansas, which is ridiculous. You know, there were some polls showing that Kansas was within 5% in 2016. Well, clearly it wasn't because he won the state by about 20. So, again, I want to make sure I have a lot more high-quality polls coming in of especially the swing states, but certainly some of the safe states. So that's why I keep the fundamentals in and why I'm probably still going to keep them in even when we start getting more polls. I'm just going to slightly weigh the national polling environment more. Whether or not I give it half of that base vote, whether I give it half of this value, or rather than a third, or whether I even bump it up to 60%, which is certainly a possibility, that's when I am going to change things. And of course, if you look at my Senate model, I've made a lot of the same decisions just to keep it consistent between models. Obviously, a link to both will be down in the description, as well as to my Patreon. And I'm sorry I ran a very long time over this, but I really honestly did try to keep it short because I think it's important that we keep it short. But I wanted to go through and explain everything and show you some examples and give you, and I wound up showing you where my model shows everything today, which I think was a little bit shocking considering the polls. Let's actually go to here because they update quite frequently. Notice I didn't use this one because it's only of all adults, especially when they had a registered voter poll included. And this isn't done purposely to help Donald Trump out. This is done because registered and likely voter polls are more accurate. And I want to use the most accurate numbers I can get and ignore the ones that are going to be less accurate. And of course, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to be ignoring, say, pollsters with a bad rating according to 538. It just means that I'm going to be using a certain type of poll. Because, say, a similar rating for for example, Ipsos, they tend to favor the Democrat by about as much as Rasmussen favors the Republicans. Now, here's the interesting thing. In the same voting period, Rasmussen found worse numbers for Donald Trump than a better pollster, YouGov, did. So that's why I kind of keep everything kind of... that's why I just don't adjust polls for House effect or anything. And of course, then there's Monmouth, which is a great pollster. And of course, you can go further and further down and look at these things and really dig into it. And I highly recommend you actually go to each pollster and look at their crosstabs, because those are extremely important. But anyway, if y'all enjoyed, please leave a like or a comment. If you want anything else clarified specifically, obviously comment down in the comments. If you're not subscribed already and you actually enjoy the content, or at the very least find it interesting and want to continue seeing how I change this model, how I continue doing my forecasts, that type of thing, then please please subscribe. And consider supporting me on Patreon. I haven't updated my Patreon page in a long time, but I will at some point if anyone contributes. And I'm going to be starting to do some specific matchups, such as Trump versus Biden, stuff like that. And remember, I try and get it to not what the polls are currently showing, but what will happen based off by the time Election Day rolls around. So I'll be trying to project things out to that point. Anyway, hope you all enjoyed. I'll see you guys next time. Take it easy. Have a very nice day, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.